Our speaker today is our own Bos Todd, Chairman Emeritus of Todd Asset Management, my business partner and friends these last 33 years, and one of the best Rotary presidents ever. In the next 20 minutes, Bos will review the results of his economic forecast for 2012 and share his thoughts on the outlook for 2013. I'm a little nervous about this, Bos, because as we were coming up here, Henry Heiser pulled out his notes from last year's meeting. No fair, Henry. However, as most of you know, as a part of these proceedings, Bos also offers several stock picks for the year ahead. For the last 2 years, you may recall, he gave us what could best be described as a comfort portfolio. Well-known, high-quality companies with above-average dividend yields and with the capability of growing those dividends. In fact, 4 of his 5 selections for 2012 increased their dividends by 10% or more. Let's take a moment and review how his stock picks performed over the last 12 months. But first, let me remind you of a quote. Matthew 23rd, verse 12. Whosoever shall exalt himself shall be humbled. And he that shall humble himself shall be exalted. I remind you this year of the same. In any case, first, let me review the changes this year, the stock price performance. First pick was Philip Morris International, up 6.6%, Coca-Cola up 3.6%, Microsoft up 2.9%, Vodafone Group down 8.4%, and McDonald's down 12.1%. That Chinese government just can't take a joke when it comes to injecting chickens with penicillin. Well, including dividends, which is a very important part of his strategy, the 5 stocks increased an average of 2.2% versus 15.6% for the S&P 500, which also includes paid dividends. Now, prior to this year, Bos's picks had exceeded the S&P 500 in 8 out of the last 10 years, matched the index 1 year, along with last year's results, which ranked in the top 1% among all managers. Alas, that is not the case this year, where the ranking fell to the bottom 10%. Before I turn the meeting over to Bos to learn to learn whether he has changed his strategy in this era of suppressed interest rates, we must issue the usual non-standard SEC disclaimers. Past performance is no guarantee of future performance. This is one of those years when he is thankful for that. In terms of the value of this advice, please remember, you get what you pay for. Ladies and gentlemen, without further delay, the Wizard of Bos.
Thank you, Robert. I think. You know, this is an extraordinary time. Yesterday, the stock market went up 300 points. They knew I was going to come speak to you guys today with some great words of wisdom. This is an extraordinary situation. You know, this is a tricky business. You can make money, you can lose money. Steve Luthold, an investment counselor friend of mine in Minneapolis, sent me a cartoon. 2 racehorses standing in the stable talking with one another, and one says to the other, you know, we're in a tricky business. You sprain an ankle, they put you out to stud. You break a leg, they shoot you. That's the same business I'm in. Well, Neil Sauce, the chief economist at Credit Suisse, yesterday sent a memo about the activity of the weekend with the dancing on the edge of the cliff unfolding. He called it dodging the iceberg, but still adrift. You know, this fiscal cliff odyssey produced no long-run budget fix. It leaves the door wide open for another debt ceiling fiasco in a matter of weeks and installs a new mini cliff for government spending called sequestration in 2 months. But the deal agreed on at the last moment lessens the risk of the worst case scenario of a recession-inducing fiscal shock. And I'm delighted it permanently extends many tax rates that for a decade required recurring legislative renewal. The alternative minimum tax is one, for example. So no wonder the Dow had that strong move yesterday. We still face significant fiscal drag this year as most Americans receive a tax increase. The Social Security payroll tax cut, which was 2%, will lapse. That affects everybody. This is a $126 billion tax increase on all wage earners. Income taxes, though, will rise only for the top 2%. The first income tax increase in over 20 years. It affects couples making over $450,000 or $400,000 for individuals. The estate tax, this is was a pleasant surprise, currently 35% with a $5 million exemption, was scheduled to go back to only a $1 million exemption with an onerous 55% rate. I'm relieved it will be a 40% rate with a $5 million exemption continuing. Furthermore, it's going to be indexed for inflation, which is very good. The deal on balance produced no impact on our economic forecast for this year. We still expect about a 2% gain in real GDP. Fiscal drags, though, should essentially offset the improving fundamentals that we see in housing and in an improving labor market and in consumer spending. Structural budget issues, particularly entitlement spending, were sidestepped in this debate. And so the long-run fiscal trajectory of the budget deficit remains on an explosive path. All this dithering is frustrating to me because we do have 23 million people out of work or underemployed 3.5 years into a recovery, the worst recession in over 60 years. Obama now has a second chance to show he's not only the best campaigner in a generation, but also an effective president. How he handles this fiscal cliff in the months ahead will set the tone for the next 4 years. Gillian Tett of the Financial Times, who is one of my favorite gurus, says we can expect a lot of cliff dancing. That's where I got the title for the talk, really, which she calls tiptoeing back and forth from disaster with a series of delaying tactics, thus continuing to kick the can down the road. Instead of compromising with the grand bargains like Bowles-Simpson would have been, she thinks we will just get sluggish growth in 2013. You know, over the last 5 years, the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, and the European Central Bank have embarked on significant stimulus through expanding their balance sheets by printing money. It's obviously been very supportive for the equity markets. It can't go on forever, but it's wonderful while it lasts. I believe stocks, though, will prevail because interest rates are extremely low. I find plenty of blue chip stocks that yield 3% or more and grow at least 6% a year. Bernanke said he was going to keep interest rates low until employment data improves significantly. By that he means getting it down around 6.5%. The interest rate on a new car loan, for example, or a 15-year mortgage is only 3%. for the borrower, it doesn't get any better than that.